Yes, yes. Hello, good afternoon, boa tarde, olá. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor. I would like to thank all the MAPS staff, volunteers, organizers, donors, and supporters in many ways, and also all of you for being here. Among so many rooms with inspiring speakers and amazing scientific breakthroughs and cultural reawakenings and artistic visions, I am sorry to say, but I'm the bearer of some bad news. But please stay still where you are, because if we manage to get through the bad news, we can hopefully learn a few things. And if there's something I think the psychedelic research community really rediscovered last year, is that difficult and challenging experiences, also known as bad trips, aren't something to be necessarily avoided or prevented. Because if people are supported and stay attentive and with an open heart, they can learn and grow from these experiences. Thanks to the Johns Hopkins team for their excellent and timely paper reminding us all of this. This is a very important consideration. And as Pema Chodron once remarked, as a species, we should never underestimate our low tolerance for discomfort. So here are the bad news. January 1st, 2017, 56 people were killed in a prison in Manaus, Brazil. Almost half were decapitated. There were almost 3 times more prisoners inside than the prison's full capacity. Mostly men. On the outside, many women trying to get information on who was dead and who was alive on the inside. But nobody really knew. The brutality was so intense that the police could not identify bodies nor heads. And this lasted for a couple of days. The criminalistic site in Manaus has a total capacity to receive only 20 bodies. That's less than a half of the dead men inside the prison that day. If we count family members and close relatives, here we have hundreds of people exposed to intense trauma in a single day. And this rebellion quickly escalated. In the first 2 weeks of 2017, 127 prisoners were killed, and hundreds more escaped from revolts in other prisons and states. Yet, this was only the tip of the iceberg. Brazil has 600,000 prisoners inside an infrastructure that should only hold 370,000. This is the world's fourth largest prison population. Inside these prisons, lack of hygiene and basic human needs are very common. Abuse, rape, and excessive violence are the ordinary reality for thousands of young men and women, mostly of them black. Many of them were arrested alone, unarmed, did not have a previous criminal record, and yet they are charged with drug trafficking by simple possession of small amounts of a plant which is freely smoked on the streets here in Oakland, cannabis. But inside and outside are not two distinct realities. On the contrary, they are more like complementary universes, constantly feeding back one into the other. Poles of the same magnet, as Alan Watts used to say. One cannot exist without the other. Outside these prisons, Brazil is also extremely violent. 32 of the 50 most violent cities in the planet are located in Brazil. 60,000 people die every year, from violent assault and gun shootings in Brazil. Half of those deaths are because of the drug war. In the last 5 years, Brazil had 300,000 homicides, not far from 400,000 fatalities in Syria in the same period of 5 years. Outside prisons, women are very, very vulnerable. Brazil has 5 million aggressions against women each year. That's 500 aggressions every hour. There are 5.5 million kids in Brazil that don't have a father in their documents. 66% of the Brazilian population reported in a recent study having witnessed women being abused in public spaces in 2016. These aggressions were physically or verbal, and 50% of the witnesses did nothing about what they saw. The police also suffers intensely. One police officer dies each day while on duty in Brazil, and the Brazilian police kills 8 people a day on average. 60% of these cops had colleagues killed while working, and 70% of the police force fears getting killed when they are out of service. 16% of them suffer with intense psychological distress, which means 110,000 police officers suffering around the country. Yet, the public health system is mostly lacking. In 2013, Bahia, in the state of Bahia, there were 10 psychologists to attend 32,000 police officers. Unfortunately, Brazil is not a strange exception. Latin America as a whole is the continent where 80% of the world's most violent cities are located. And it's a continent with half of a millennium of an extremely violent history. Since Latin America was invaded in the 16th century, killings and abuse became the norm. Trauma runs in our veins. The impact of all this past and present violence is immense. The Brazilian government now spends 13 times more with each prisoner than with a student at school, thus reinforcing cycles of misery and violence, which will only make our problems bigger in the years to come. And the whole population suffers. According to the World Mental Health Survey Initiative, a worldwide study about mental health coordinated by Harvard University, and the São Paulo Megacity Mental Health Survey Study, São Paulo is the world capital of mental disease. 30% of the population in São Paulo suffers with psychiatric diagnosis in a 12-month period. Anxiety disorders are top, affecting 20% of the population, and 10% of those are considered severe. That's almost twice the rate of severe disorders in the country ranked second, which is the USA, where 5.7% of disorders are considered severe. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is also highly prevalent in Brazil. In Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, for example, 85% of the population has been exposed to extreme violence at some point in their lives, and 5% of the population has a diagnosis of PTSD. That's 1 million people in just these 2 megacities. Now, as a tiny magnet in the palm of our hands aligns with a much larger planetary magnetic field, PTSD patients are somehow aligned with the social epidemic violence in which they live. Some of these patients describe their situation as a prison, but from the inside out. They experience recurring nightmares, generalized anxiety, affective difficulties, panic attacks, and they can become aggressive and violent when they lose control and they feel intense rage. Many of them, unfortunately, commit suicide. And current psychiatric and psychotherapeutic treatments are effective for no more than 50% of these patients. And unfortunately as well, many of them get addicted and suffer from a long list of adverse effects from chronic use of antidepressants and anxiolytics decades without stopping. So, what can be done about all this? Epidemic violence on a national scale and PTSD in an individual scale. Let's start with the individual level. Thanks to the legacy of Sasha and Anne Shugin, and many others, and the patient's dedication and 30 years of persistence from MAPS, we have good news for the survivors and heirs of all this violence. There is a light in the end of the trauma tunnel. And one way to get there will hopefully be through evidence-based, scientific-driven MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. The results from phase 2 studies, as we have just seen in the previous sections, are very robust. Collectively analyzed, we can say that 2/3 of severe PTSD patients no longer met the criterion for the diagnosis after the end of their MDMA treatments. And the remainder third had less intense symptoms. These are very large numbers. And the benefits lasted for 4 years. That's a very long time. Furthermore, these positive results, furthermore, patients are not getting addicted to MDMA or other drugs. But if you are still skeptical about these positive results, an independent meta-analysis done at the University of New Hampshire showed MDMA-assisted psychotherapy has larger effect sizes than prolonged exposure therapy, and that was true both when the results are measured by the clinician-observed outcomes or by patient self-report outcomes. Finally, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy had less dropouts. That means that less patients give up the treatment with MDMA than the alternatives that are out there. These are very, very important results. Therapists, patients, and statistics all seem to agree and lead to the same conclusion. However, if you're part of those who look for significant findings beyond just statistics, healing involves powerful stories as well. We have just heard some very intense and powerful quotes from Marcella, Bruce, and the Mithofers in the previous section, so I'm just mention a few that were included in the published papers. So one patient, he said that, quote, "I had never before felt what I felt today in terms of loving connection. I am not sure I can reach it again without MDMA, but I'm not without hope that it is possible. Maybe it's like having an aerial map, so now I know that a trail exists." Another patient says, quote, "The therapy made it possible for me to live." And finally, a third one that I like this quote said the following: "I was always too frightened to look below the sadness. The MDMA and the support allowed me to pull off the controls, and I knew how and what and how fast or slow I needed to see my own pain." So here we have large numbers and powerful stories. This is very encouraging because the healing task at hand is enormous, it's huge. And psychedelic healing is not just about good feelings or love drugs. As many patients express in their own way, facing the shadows may be one of the toughest things we can ever do. That's why the therapy includes not only the drug, but professional support by 2 simultaneous therapists in all sessions. They have 15 therapeutic sessions in total, 13 of those without MDMA, and 3 potentiated by this medicine and evocative music. To facilitate this process is now our mission. That is why we are wholeheartedly dedicated to bring MDMA-assisted psychotherapy to Brazil, where millions suffer with trauma. So this all started in 2014 when I was in London, learning and discovery with the Imperial College team what does LSD do to the brain networks in fully conscious human beings. Quite an exciting period in my life. And I ended up celebrating my 35th birthday at the majestic Tyringham Hall, where I took a training that deeply touched me. I spent 1 week watching tapes of severe PTSD patients as they went through the many stages in the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy program. And while I listened, Rick Doblin, Anne and Michael Mithofer, and others present there, helping to develop this treatment became a fascination and an ethical imperative. I must bring this to Brazil, I thought with myself one night, and then the other night, and then the third night, thinking it over and over again. So I shared my vision with them, and they gladly helped to develop this into a project. We got IRB approval in the mid of 2015, and in December of the same year, we ran one of the country's first ever scientific crowdfunding campaigns. 409 people donated 53,000 reais, and MAPS will double that amount with a $15,000 donation. And all of that only made possible because we have an amazing therapeutic team. Bruno Rasmussen, Dora and Álvaro Jardim. I would not take this forward if it was not by the extreme confidence I have in your work. I also had very important support from university professors Dartil Xavier, Luiz Toffoli, and Siddhartha Ribeiro. Congratulations, guys, you are real pioneers. In 2016, we got our Schedule 1 drug license, meaning we can store and use MDMA for research in the country. That's unprecedented there. We are now awaiting the health authority to issue us an import permit, the first ever such document for psychedelic research in Brazil. Last September, I came to California with Álvaro, Dora, and Bruno for in-depth training with Bruce Poulter, Marcelo Talora, Annie, and Michael Mithofer, just 2 months before the successful end of phase 2 meeting between MAPS and the FDA. So we are now ready to start helping the first 4 Brazilian patients in our first pilot study, phase 2 clinical trial, as soon as the MDMA arrives in the country. And we are working hard to develop this into part of the international phase 3 study with the dream of having psychedelic-assisted therapy legalized in Brazil. So getting back to the bad trips lesson, soon we will have 4 patients selected to be ethically treated with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, so they can, hopefully, get empowered and encouraged to navigate through their mind's own shadows till they find their own light. At least that's how it happened in my own MDMA session that took part as the training to become therapists. I had MDMA with the Mithofers in Charleston, and first they encouraged me. And when I say they, I mean Annie, Michael, and MDMA. And this gave me power and courage to open my heart and move close to my fears, sorrows, and pain. Maybe that is what lower bold signal in the amygdala feels like for a young neuroscientist. For now, we're motivated to work hard in order to help more people get out of the violence and trauma vicious feedback loop. But what about the social level? Can this new treatment have a beneficial impact at that scale? We had amazing lectures today on the neuroscience of the pro-social effects of MDMA. But instead of attempting an answer to this difficult question, I will leave you with these words from Boris Heifetz, who is also here in the conference, a researcher at Stanford Medical University. They published this last year in the scientific journal Cell. Quote, "The world's populations need more compassion and empathy for one another. The study of MDMA provides one small but potentially important step toward reaching that goal." Unquote. Thank you very much for your attention.
If you have a question for Eduardo, you can come up here and use this microphone. I actually have a question, so
Yep.
if anyone else gives it a little bit more time. I recently learned about spiritism, and I was just wondering if you had contacted anybody or were having any collaborations with people in the spiritism movement. Do you know about that?
Well, I know about it. It's very big
clinics?
in Brazil. Yeah, Brazil is a very religious country, quite unique. There's lots of mixtures and different types. but I don't have any personal contact with the
Okay.
field.
I've got someone that might be good to talk to then.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Any other questions? Yeah, come on up.
Hi, thank you so much,
Hey,
Eduardo, for the talk. It's so good, and I really
thank
feel
you.
like we're on the vanguard of therapy right now for PTSD and with MDMA. I was wondering about the process that goes into creating the content for those MDMA-assisted therapies. Like, how does the content of those sessions get decided on, and how do you try to incorporate self-reflection on trauma and like systems of oppression, for example?
Yeah, thank you. Very important question. So I didn't go into the details of the therapy because I just had these amazing talks by the Mithofers and Marcel and Bruce. But basically, the whole thing, as it's being developed until this point, comes from the work of Stanislav Grof, and the approach is to be non-directive. So it means that the content of the experience is not decided by us researchers or by the therapists, but really by each patient's own process. So MDMA opens them for feeling more their emotions, and it facilitates reasoning and thinking. And as things come through, they are free to talk and engage in psychotherapeutic process with the therapist at any time. And when they feel like not talking, they're encouraged to listen to music with high quality headphones and to stay introspective. So these two phases of the experience, they goes on alternating in each MDMA session, and really who guides is each patient who knows his own process. And the role of the therapist is to support, to encourage, to be compassionate. So I was very moved in Charleston, and I was with my eyes closed, feeling very, very intense things and having memories of difficult experiences I've been through in the last year or so. And every time I would open my eyes, I would see those two beautiful faces of Michael and Annie, like looking at me and fully attentive and smiling and asking, "Do you need anything?" And I said, "Yeah." So I think that's the general approach. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, great.
So my name is Kalia. I'm from Falcora Mental Health and Neurotech Initiative. Can you hear me? My name is Kalia, and I'm from the Falcora Mental Health and Neurotech Initiative. And we're really looking at ways that you can scale mental health treatment. And I feel like MDMA is one of those that in situations of trauma or humanitarian disasters might be very appropriate. And I'm wondering what you would see as a way to take what you've done so far, the really fantastic steps to make this something that's legal and available in Brazil, and scale it from 4 to hundreds to thousands. What would you see that you would need? Would that just be funding, or would that require a lot in terms of expanding those networks of protocols?
Yeah, it's really a good question. Thanks. So the major point right now, it's really funding, so we can proceed with this work. So the pilot phase 2 with 4 patients is completely funded already, but in order to move to a phase 3 and trying to proceed to having it legalized and accepted by the health authority in Brazil, we need much larger funding, and that's what we've been working the last year or two, and I hope we'll get there soon.
One last question. Do you think that the health authorities would be amenable to that kind of a scale-up?
Sorry?
Do you think that they would be happy or okay with that kind of a scale-up?
I think so, yeah, I hope so. I mean, this is a big problem in Brazil. PTSD has huge socioeconomic costs, both for the public health system, the private health sectors. And like we said, like the current therapies, they are not as good as MDMA, and many patients fail the current treatments, and they are being well treated in the MDMA approach. So the strategy is to use the phase 3 as a time. This should be some 3 or 4 years where we will be treating many patients, and we will we will use the phase 3 as a moment to train more therapists. So right now we have just Álvaro and Dora trained in this methodology in Brazil, and Dr. Bruno as well. But we can train like 30 therapists every 2 or 3 months. So this means that by the end of phase 3, we could have like 300 therapists trained around the country. And when MDMA gets to market, we could be in many cities at once and keep scaling up as this thing moves on in the years to come.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yep.
All right.